I am Willow Grant, 28 years old, from Virginia. The day my mother laughed at my dream is burned into my memory like a seam stitched too tightly to ever come undone. It was spring, and the light in our kitchen fell across the cracked tiles in pale, dusty stripes. I'd just finished sewing my first real dress. Not a practice piece, not a school project, but a design from my heart. Soft satin, a deep emerald green that caught light like dew on grass. I held it up to her with trembling hands. "Mom," I said, smiling nervously, "what do you think?" She didn't even look up from her coffee. "Another one of your costumes?" she said, flipping through the newspaper. "It's not a costume," I whispered. It's a dress. I designed it." She sighed, that long, sharp sound that always cut deeper than any word. "Willow, when are you going to stop wasting your time? Sewing isn't a career. It's a hobby, like knitting or scrapbooking." I stood there in silence, my knuckles white around the hanger. The smell of burnt toast lingered in the air. She finally looked up, just long enough to glance at the dress. And then she laughed, a short, bitter laugh that seemed to echo through every corner of the room. "You're not going to pay the bills making clothes, sweetheart. You need to be realistic. Apply for something at the office. There's dignity in stability." That was the moment something in me cracked. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments. And subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. Because for me, that moment was the beginning of the end. The moment I stopped looking at my mother as my safe place and started seeing her as the wall I'd have to climb to find myself. When I was little, she used to braid my hair before school. Her hands smelled like detergent and coffee. I'd sit on the kitchen stool while she told me stories about how hard she worked to raise me alone. How she wanted me to have a better life, one where I didn't have to worry about foolish dreams. She didn't mean to sound cruel. But every time she said it, it felt like a thread being pulled from the fabric of who I was. By the time I turned 16, I'd stopped showing her my sketches. She'd find them sometimes, piles of paper tucked under my mattress, dresses made of lace, feathers, and impossible colors. She'd shake her head and throw them in the trash. "You could be a lawyer, Willow. You're smart. Why throw that away?" Because I didn't want to argue, I said nothing. But I kept drawing. At 17, I started sewing at night when she slept. Old curtains, thrifted shirts, anything I could cut apart and rebuild. The sound of the sewing machine was like my heartbeat. Quick, nervous, alive. Sometimes I'd imagine her waking up, walking into my room and seeing what I'd made. In my mind, she'd smile. She'd finally say, "I was wrong, Willow. You're talented." But that moment never came. After high school, I got accepted into a small fashion institute in Richmond. I still remember handing her the acceptance letter, the words "Congratulations" printed in bold red letters. She read it once, then again, her eyes narrowing. "Fashion?" she said like it was a disease. "You think we can afford this? Do you think loans grow on trees?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I can get a scholarship," she cut me off. "You're not wasting money on something that won't feed you. I didn't break my back for you to end up a starving artist." The letter fluttered to the floor like a broken leaf. I worked 2 part-time jobs that summer, one at a diner, the other at a fabric store. I'd save every dollar, every tip, and keep it hidden in a jar under my bed. I told her it was for emergencies, but really, it was my escape fund, my ticket to somewhere she couldn't reach me with her disbelief. The day I left for Richmond, she didn't come to see me off. She just said, "You'll regret this." Maybe she believed that. Maybe she thought the world would prove her right. But I promised myself I'd prove her wrong. College wasn't easy. My scholarship only covered part of the tuition. I spent nights stitching hemlines for other students, altering thrift store clothes for side cash, sometimes skipping meals just to buy fabric. There were nights I thought of quitting, nights when I sat in my cramped dorm, crying quietly so my roommate wouldn't hear. But every time I held a piece of fabric between my fingers, I felt that spark again. Satin, chiffon, linen, they spoke to me. They reminded me that creation was a form of survival. I didn't need my mother's belief, I needed my own. During my final year, our school hosted a showcase for student designers. It was the biggest night of our lives, one that could make or break careers. I poured everything into my collection. 6 dresses, each representing a stage of grief and rebirth. I invited my mother. I even sent her a handwritten note, the way I used to as a kid. She never replied. On the night of the showcase, I looked out from backstage. Rows of glowing faces, the murmur of excitement, the smell of perfume and nerves. But the seat I saved for her, front row, right in the middle, was empty. The lights dimmed, the music started, and my models walked out one by one. The crowd gasped. They clapped. I could hear my name whispered, repeated, rising like a tide. But all I could think about was that empty chair. Afterward, a scout from a small fashion house in New York approached me. She said my designs had a rare kind of soul. That night, I cried harder than I ever had, not out of sadness, but release. Because even though my mother wasn't there, I had finally proven something, not to her, but to myself. Years later, when my name appeared in magazines, she'd tell people she always knew I'd make it. But that's not where this story ends, because before she ever bragged, she broke me. And before I ever shined, I had to learn how to stitch myself back together. There's a strange thing about words. They don't just disappear once spoken. They linger. They find ways to settle in your bones. My mother's words did that to me. They lived under my skin like old stitches that never quite healed. Every time I picked up a needle or a pencil, I could hear her voice in the back of my mind. You're not practical. Art doesn't feed people. You'll come running back when the world teaches you a lesson. And in some cruel way, part of me wanted her to be right, because if she was right, then I could stop fighting. I could stop trying. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Even on the nights when exhaustion pulled at me, when my hands cramped from hours of sewing, her disbelief was the thing that kept me going. It became the fire I burned by. At the Fashion Institute, most students had parents who sent them fabrics from Milan or booked them weekend getaways for inspiration. I had hand-me-downs and a thrift store iron that sparked every time I plugged it. And when I told my classmates I was from Virginia and that my mom worked in a real estate office, they nodded politely until they realized I wasn't connected. Then they drifted away. But I wasn't there for them. Was there for the girl who used to sketch in the margins of her math notebook while her mother sighed in the background. There was one instructor, Professor Layton, who saw something in me. He had this calm, patient way of watching without interrupting. One day, after class, he leaned over my shoulder as I was sketching a gown made entirely of recycled denim. "You design like someone who's seen both hunger and hope," he said softly. I blinked. "Is that a compliment?" He chuckled. "The highest kind. Keep that edge. Don't let anyone iron it out of you." I smiled for the first time that week. His words felt like a small patch of sunlight in the long winter of my mother's shadows. I still called home sometimes, though each call felt more like a duty than a comfort. "How's work?" she'd ask, never school. "I'm doing okay," I'd reply. "My designs won't get you a pension, Willow. Be smart." I'd bite my tongue, pretending her voice didn't still have the power to crush me. Sometimes she'd add, "You know, your cousin Jenny just got promoted. She's buying her own place now." I wanted to scream. Good for Jenny. But she's not me. Instead, I'd just say, "That's nice, Mom," and end the call early. Each word she spoke became another invisible weight on my chest. Then came the showcase. Review. Each student was to present a mini collection. 5 pieces representing their creative identity. The best designer would receive a summer internship in New York. For weeks, I barely slept. I stitched through sunrise, my fingers covered in tiny cuts, my dorm littered with fabric scraps. I designed from memory. The texture of old curtains, the shimmer of sunlight through glass, the ache of rejection turned into elegance. When the day finally came, I stood before the judges in my one good pair of heels, secondhand, slightly too big. Professor Layton smiled from the back row as I unveiled my collection. Reclamation. It wasn't just fashion. It was a confession. My life, sewn in fabric. Each piece told a story, a rough cotton dress stitched with gold thread, humility meets hope, a jacket made from repurposed upholstery, beauty from burden, a flowing gown of muted beige that blossomed into color under the stage lights, transformation. When the applause came, it was soft at first, then grew, but one voice was missing, the one I wanted to hear the most. That night, I called my mother again. She answered after the third ring. Willow? Yeah, I wanted to tell you. I got picked. They want me in New York for the summer. There was silence on the line. Then a flat, that's good. Just that's good. Not I'm proud of you. Not I knew you could do it. I swallowed hard. You don't sound happy. I'm just worried, she said. Those kinds of industries chew people up, and, well, maybe you should have a backup plan. A backup plan. I'd just achieved the biggest milestone of my life, and all she could think about was failure. Right, I said quietly. A backup plan. I hung up before my voice could shake. New York was chaos and adrenaline. I fell in love with it instantly. The smell of coffee and ambition. The streets humming with energy. I worked for Maison Lerieux, a small but respected fashion house in Soho. I fetched coffee, ran fabric samples, and cleaned pins off the floor. But I also watched. I absorbed everything, the way designers spoke, the way they handled fabric like it was sacred. One day, my supervisor, Celine, asked me to stay late. A model had dropped out last minute, and they needed someone to help finish a fitting. As I adjusted the gown's hem, she watched me carefully. Who taught you to sew like that? She asked. I hesitated. Myself, Celine smiled. Then you're dangerous. By the time the internship ended, she handed me a reference letter that changed my life. Willow Grant is raw, talented, and unflinchingly dedicated. The kind of designer who will one day change the narrative. I kept that letter folded in my wallet like armor, because every time my mother's voice echoed, "It's just a hobby," I could unfold that paper and remember someone else saw me differently. Years passed. My career grew in small, steady steps. Assistant jobs, freelance work, endless nights of sewing in a studio apartment with a leaky window, and through it all, her words never left me. Not as poison anymore, but as fuel. Every cutting remark she'd ever made became thread in the story I was stitching. The day she laughed, the day she dismissed me, the day she told me dreams don't feed people, they all became reasons to keep going. Because someday, I wanted her to look at my work and realize that she wasn't just wrong. She was the reason I succeeded. They say every daughter has a moment when she stops trying to please her mother. For me, that moment came on a rainy Tuesday. I was 23, fresh out of my New York internship, back home in Virginia, and clutching a portfolio filled with dreams I thought would impress her. It was supposed to be a celebration. I'd landed my first independent client. A local bridal boutique wanted me to design a capsule collection for their summer season. It wasn't Paris or Milan, but it was a start. My start. I stood in the living room holding sketches and swatches, the rain tapping against the windows. My mother sat in her favorite armchair, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. "Mom," I said, my voice bubbling with pride. "They're actually paying me. Real money. They want 6 dresses." She didn't even look up. "How much?" $5,000 total, I said. "And I keep a percentage if they sell." Her lips pursed. $5,000? She scoffed. "That's what an accountant makes in a month. You call that a career?" "It's a beginning," I said carefully. "I can build from there." She lowered her magazine and stared at me, her eyes sharp. "You're 23, Willow. You should be thinking about settling down, finding someone stable, not playing dress-up with fabric." Her words hit harder than she knew. I'd spent years stitching my self-worth together, piece by fragile piece. But in that moment, she tugged at the thread again, the same one she'd been pulling since I was 16. I felt it unravel inside me. "Do you ever listen to yourself?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You talk about stability like it's love, like it's happiness, but it's not." Her eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone." "No," I said louder this time. "I'm done watching it. I've worked for this, Mom, every night, every weekend. And all you ever do is tear it down." She stood, anger flickering across her face. "Don't you dare talk to me like I haven't sacrificed for you. You think sewing a few dresses compares to what I've done?" I took a step back. My chest was tight. "You didn't raise me to live your regrets, Mom." For a moment, the room was silent except for the rain. Then she said the words that broke something I could never repair. "You're not special, Willow. You never were." The sound of it filled the air. Sharp, final, cruel. Like a thread snapping, I couldn't breathe. I stared at her, waiting for her to take it back. But she didn't. Instead, she crossed her arms and turned back to her chair. "Grow up," she muttered. "The world doesn't care about your little fashion show." I wanted to scream, to throw something, to shake her until she saw me. Really saw me. But instead, I walked out. I left the house in the middle of the storm, barefoot, clutching my sketches to my chest so they wouldn't get wet. The rain hit my face like needles, but I didn't stop walking. Because somewhere between the thunder and my heartbeat, I decided something. If she couldn't see my worth, I'd make the world see it for me. That night, I slept in my car outside my old high school. I remember staring at the ceiling, tracing the raindrops that slid down the windshield. My hands shook, but not from the cold. It was fury. Raw, hungry, electric fury. I thought about every time she'd laughed, every time she'd said, "Be realistic," every time she'd made me feel small. And I whispered into the dark, "You'll eat those words someday." In the morning, I drove back to Richmond. I didn't even pack. I left my clothes, my photos, everything that tied me to that house. I moved into a tiny attic studio above a cafe. One window, no air conditioning, but enough space for a sewing machine and a dream. I took on small commissions. Prom dresses, alterations, even costumes for local theater productions. I worked 16-hour days, fueled by caffeine and defiance. At night, I'd write my goals in a notebook. One day, my designs will be on the runway. One day she'll say my name with pride, and I won't need it. Months turned into years. I began posting my designs online, sketches, fabric reels, small collections. One of my posts, a handmade gown made entirely of recycled lace and beads, went viral. A blogger called it ethereal sustainability. Overnight, my inbox flooded with inquiries, orders, invitations. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. But success came with its own kind of silence, the kind that makes you wonder why the one person you wanted to notice still doesn't. 2 years later, my brand, Willow Ray, was invited to a Sustainable Fashion Week event in DC. It wasn't massive, but it was official. Press, photographers, designers from all over the country. I debated inviting my mother. I even typed the message, "I'd love for you to come see my work." Then I deleted it. She didn't deserve front row seats to something she'd tried so hard to destroy. On the day of the show, I stood backstage surrounded by models wearing my creations, silk, linen, and color that felt like breathing after drowning. I thought I'd feel nervous but I didn't. I felt steady, rooted. When the lights dimmed and my name echoed through the speakers, I closed my eyes. I imagined the rain, the living room, her voice saying, "You're not special." And for the first time, it didn't hurt, it fueled me. After the show, people rushed to congratulate me, designers, influencers, even reporters asking for interviews. But the best moment came later that night. I was packing up when a familiar voice spoke behind me. "I saw you." I turned. My mother stood in the doorway. I froze. My chest tightened. "What are you doing here?" "I read about it in the paper," she said, her voice uneven. I thought I'd stop by. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or pride in her eyes. Maybe both. "You didn't believe in this," I said quietly. She sighed. "People change." I stared at her. "Do they?" She hesitated, then looked away. "You proved me wrong." I almost wanted to thank her. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "No, Mom. I proved me right." She flinched, and for once she didn't have anything to say. That was the last time I saw her for a long while. And though she left that night without apology, she'd already given me everything I needed, her disbelief, because without it, I would have never learned how strong I could be. That was the breaking point. The day the daughter stopped waiting for love that would never come and started sewing her own version of it instead. Silence has a sound. It's the hum of a sewing machine at 2 a.m., the rustle of fabric against your skin when no one's around to see what you've made. After that night with my mother, after the rain, the fight, the words that burned like acid, silence became my closest companion. It wasn't peaceful, though. It was the kind of silence that listens, that presses down on your chest and whispers everything you've been trying not to feel. I used to imagine that success would feel warm, that when I finally made it, the loneliness would fade. But I was wrong. Success doesn't erase loneliness. It just decorates it with prettier things. The truth was, I was winning. And yet I'd never felt so alone. My studio became my world. The walls were covered in sketches, mood boards, and scraps of fabric pinned in chaotic order. The air always smelled like steam and thread. Every morning, sunlight would pour in through the cracked window, painting gold streaks on the floor. I'd sit there with my coffee and tell myself, "This is what you wanted, Willow. Keep going." But some mornings my reflection in the window would answer, "At what cost?" The night my first official Willow Ray collection sold out online, I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes ready for shipment. My phone buzzed with notifications, messages, praise from strangers who'd never met me. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to smile. Because every congratulations felt like it was echoing into an empty room. The loneliness hit hardest on holidays. That first Thanksgiving after the DC show, I stayed in my studio while the rest of the city gathered around tables and laughter. I tried cooking something, a sad attempt at turkey with cranberry sauce from a jar. But halfway through, I just gave up and ate cereal instead. I told myself I didn't care, that I didn't need family dinners or sentimental phone calls. But when I saw people posting photos with their mothers, smiling, holding hands, I couldn't help it. I felt that sting. I picked up my phone once, typed out, "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom," then deleted it before I could hit send, because the truth was, I didn't owe her that anymore. But healing isn't linear. Some days I felt powerful, like I could take on the world. Other days, I'd break down over something as small as a ripped seam or a missed call. One evening, I was sketching a new design when my hand started shaking. My pencil fell and I just froze. My throat tightened, my eyes blurred. For no reason at all, I started crying. Not the elegant kind of crying they show in movies, but the raw, ugly kind. The kind that hurts your ribs and leaves you gasping. All the buried hurt came pouring out. The years of trying to earn love that was never given. The exhaustion of pretending I was fine. When the sobs finally stopped, I whispered into the quiet, "Why wasn't I enough?" And the silence, cruel as ever, gave me no answer. The next day, I went back to work as if nothing happened. That's what I'd learned to do. Keep moving. Keep producing. Because if I stopped, I'd have to face everything I'd been running from. But life has a strange way of forcing reflection when you least expect it. A few weeks later, I got invited to a charity gala for emerging designers. Big names were attending. Investors, influencers, even journalists from major magazines. I spent days preparing, altering my best piece, a floor-length gold gown with embroidered leaves cascading down the back. It was bold, symbolic, like sunlight growing through cracks. When I walked into that ballroom, I felt invisible and unstoppable at once. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, laughter floated through the air, and for a brief moment, I thought, maybe this is what being seen feels like, until I heard her voice. "Willow." I turned, my stomach twisting. Madison Keene, a girl I'd gone to high school with. She'd been the type who thought money was a personality. Her father owned half the town back then. "Wow," she said, scanning me from head to toe. "I almost didn't recognize you. You look different." Her tone dripped with that familiar mix of curiosity and condescension. "I design now," I said evenly. "I know," she replied with a smirk. "Everyone's talking about you. The prodigal daughter, right? Left home, made it big, all that. I smiled thinly. Something like that. Well, she said, leaning closer, your mom must be over the moon. She can't stop talking about you lately. I froze. What? Oh, you didn't know? Madison grinned. She's been bragging nonstop. Says she always believed you'd make it. Shows your articles to anyone who'll listen. It's cute. My heart sank. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. So that was it. The woman who had mocked me, dismissed me, cut me to pieces, was now using my success to polish her own image. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, staring at the glow of my laptop, scrolling through social media. And there she was, my mother. Her profile photo was new. She'd posted a link to an article about me with the caption, "So proud of my talented daughter." I always knew she'd do something special. Hundreds of likes. Dozens of comments from old neighbors and relatives. You raised her so well. She's so gifted and just like her mom. I wanted to scream. She hadn't raised me. She'd broken me. And now she was stealing the shine of what she'd tried to extinguish. For hours, I sat in silence. The shadows from the city lights danced across the wall, flickering over my mannequin. The gown I'd worn at the gala hung in the corner, golden and soft under the dim light. I walked over and ran my fingers over the fabric. Each stitch reminded me of nights I'd spent crying into my work, stitching my pain into beauty. And that's when it hit me. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to prove anything to her anymore. The best revenge wasn't anger. It was ownership. She could tell her stories, spin her lies, pretend she'd believed in me, but the truth was stitched into every inch of fabric I'd ever made, and that truth belonged only to me. That night, I wrote something on the first page of my new sketchbook. Success is silent, but revenge is the applause that follows. And with that, I knew it was time to take my next step, the one that would change everything. It's strange how a single night can shift everything. One moment, you're staring at the screen in disbelief, and the next, you're planning your next move. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. That night, as I watched my mother's post flood with likes and hollow praise, something inside me changed. The old ache, the need for her approval, the sting of her laughter. It didn't burn anymore. It crystallized. I whispered to myself, "You want to use my name, Mom? Fine, but I'll make it too big for you to carry." That was the spark of defiance. Over the next few weeks, I worked like someone possessed. My studio became a battlefield. Threads scattered across the floor, sketches layered like maps of a war I refused to lose. But this time, I wasn't creating for validation. I was creating for vengeance, not the destructive kind, but the kind that rebuilds. The kind that makes silence echo louder than screams. I started drafting a new line, one that would define me and silence every doubt that had ever been spoken over my name. I called it The Unbroken. Each piece was a story stitched in rebellion. One gown was woven from leftover silks, patched together deliberately, every seam visible, every flaw embraced. Another was made entirely of sheer fabric embroidered with phrases I'd been told over the years. Be practical. You're not special. Get a real job. The words shimmered under light. Taunts turned to art. I poured everything into that collection. Every wound, every sleepless night, every echo of her voice. By day, I handled clients and small commissions. By night, I built my revolution in fabric and thread. A month later, I submitted The Unbroken to the Willow Grant, one of the biggest competitions for independent designers in the country. Winning it meant funding, exposure, and a guaranteed debut at New York Fashion Week. I'd hesitated before hitting submit. The application asked for a short paragraph describing what the collection meant to me. I wrote, "The Unbroken is about reclaiming what was taken: dignity, confidence, and identity. It's for everyone who was ever told to shrink. It's for the voices dismissed as noise. It's for me." Then I clicked send. For days, I tried not to think about it. I drowned myself in work, but inside, I was restless. That nervous, familiar voice, the one my mother had planted years ago, whispered, "You won't make it. You never do." But this time, Another voice spoke louder. You already did. When the email came, I almost didn't open it. The subject line read, Congratulations. Willow Grant, you've been selected. I froze. My heart raced. My breath caught in my throat. They'd chosen me. I'd done it. For a moment, I just stood there, trembling, letting the weight of those words sink in. I wanted to scream, laugh, cry, all at once. And then I whispered, You were wrong, Mom. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Press interviews, fittings, frantic deadlines. My name started appearing in small fashion blogs and local news segments. Virginia's rising star, the designer redefining resilience. But behind the scenes, I was still the same girl, nervous, stubborn, running on caffeine and adrenaline. The night before my first New York showcase, I stood alone in the venue, watching my dresses lined up on mannequins under soft white light. Each one glimmered like a fragment of my soul. Elise, my assistant, approached me quietly. You should be proud, she said. I smiled faintly. I'm terrified. That means you care. I nodded, staring at the gowns. I care too much sometimes. Then make them feel it, she said simply. The next day, the room was packed. Editors, influencers, buyers, journalists. The kind of crowd I used to dream about. As the first model walked out in a gown of fractured gold silk, the crowd fell silent. Each piece told a story, not of perfection, but of survival. When the final model appeared, wearing a dress stitched entirely from translucent layers of fabric that caught the light like shattered glass, the applause began. It started small, then grew, until it filled the room like thunder. Tears blurred my vision. For the first time in my life, the sound of applause wasn't something I imagined. It was real, and it was mine. After the show, I stepped outside for air. The city buzzed around me, taxis honking, lights flashing, people rushing by. I leaned against the railing and closed my eyes, and that's when I heard it. Willow. My stomach twisted, I turned, and there she was. My mother. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her once sharp posture had softened, her hair streaked with gray. She smiled, hesitant, almost nervous. You did beautifully, she said. I saw the photos online. I had to come. I didn't say anything. She stepped closer. I always knew you'd make something of yourself. I laughed, softly, bitterly. No, you didn't, her smile faltered. Willow, that's not fair. It's the truth, I said. You told me I'd regret chasing this. You told me it wasn't a career, she sighed. I was trying to protect you. Life isn't easy. I didn't need protection, I said quietly. I needed belief. For a moment she said nothing. Then softer, well, I believe now, I stared at her. Now that the world does too. She blinked, as if the word stung. You don't mean that. But I did. Because belief after success isn't belief. It's convenience. That night, I went back to my hotel and sat on the floor surrounded by swatches of fabric. I thought about the girl who once begged for validation and realized she didn't live here anymore. The applause was nice. The recognition, even better. But what filled me most wasn't victory. It was freedom. Freedom from needing her approval. Freedom from chasing love that had conditions. Freedom from the weight of her words. I finally understood. I didn't become unbroken because she believed in me. I became unbroken because she didn't. When I closed my eyes that night, I saw the glow of runway lights, the shimmer of fabric, the proud silence of my younger self standing in the rain years ago. And for the first time, I whispered not to my mother, but to myself, You did it. After New York, everything changed. The world that once felt closed off to me suddenly opened, wide and blinding. My designs were featured in online magazines, orders poured in, and collaborations started to appear like stars blinking into view. But beneath the noise, beneath the flashing cameras and shaking hands, was a strange calm. I'd spent years fighting for this, clawing for visibility, chasing the echo of my mother's voice until it became silence. And now that I had the spotlight, I wanted to use it, not for fame, but for something else. something that mattered. My brand. Willow Ray started small, just me, 2 interns, and a shared workspace that smelled like coffee and ambition. We stitched from sunrise to midnight, every piece crafted by hand. No shortcuts, no mass production. People said it wasn't sustainable, that I needed investors, structure, strategy, but I wanted soul before scale. And somehow it worked. One morning, I walked into the studio to find my assistant, Elise, grinning like she'd won the lottery. "What's going on?" I asked, hanging my coat. She spun her laptop toward me. Vogue, Willow. "You're in Vogue," I froze. The screen glowed with my photo. Me standing backstage at Fashion Week, a quote from my interview beneath it. I design for the broken. For those who've been told no. For those who rebuild themselves one stitch at a time. My throat tightened. It wasn't just about fashion anymore. It was about survival. In the weeks that followed, investors came knocking. Some saw opportunity, others smelled profit. But I'd learned enough to recognize the difference. Then came an email that made me pause. The Harper Group, a luxury conglomerate that owned several major fashion houses. They wanted to meet. Their reputation was complicated, powerful, ruthless, and run by one of the most influential figures in the industry, Vivian Harper. Her name alone carried weight. She was the woman every designer both admired and feared. Her empire could make or destroy a career overnight. And she wanted me. The meeting was in Manhattan, at the Harper Tower. I remember standing in the lobby, heart pounding, surrounded by marble floors and cold elegance, when I was escorted into her office. Vivian stood by the window overlooking the city, tall, poised, dressed in charcoal silk. Her presence filled the room before she even spoke. "So," she said, turning to me with a faint smile, "you're the one they call the designer of resilience." "I guess so," I said, trying to steady my voice. She gestured for me to sit. "I've been watching you, Willow. Your work has something raw, something human. I like that." "Thank you," I said. "But," she continued, "passion can only take you so far. I can take you further." I blinked. "You want to work with me?" "I want to invest in you," she said. "Expand your brand globally. Paris, Milan, Tokyo. But it means letting go of some control." Control. The word hit me like a pin in fabric. Small, sharp, dangerous. "I'll think about it," I said carefully. Vivian smiled knowingly. "Of course you will. Just remember. Independence is admirable, but power is profitable." That night, I lay awake in my hotel room, staring at the ceiling. The offer was tempting, the kind of opportunity people kill for. But something about Vivian's tone lingered. Profit over passion. Power over purpose. It sounded too familiar, too much like her. My mother. The voice that told me to choose stability over dreams. And that's when I realized I wasn't just building a business. I was building a legacy, and I wasn't about to hand it over, so I declined. Politely. Professionally. Vivian's response was short, but chilling. "I respect your conviction. Let's see if it sustains you." It felt like both a compliment and a threat, and maybe it was both. Months later, her prediction was tested. My brand exploded. But success attracts vultures, people who see sincerity as weakness. Contracts were tampered with, shipments delayed, suppliers suddenly too busy. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Until I got an anonymous tip. A rival designer, someone I once helped in school, had joined Harper's newest label. And they were copying my designs. Not exactly, but close enough to confuse buyers. My heart pounded as I scrolled through their collection online. The silhouettes, the embroidery, even the campaign title, The Unbroken Reimagined. They'd stolen my story. My identity. Elise burst into my office minutes later. "Willow, have you seen this? They're using your exact concept." "I saw it," I said flatly. "What are we going to do?" I stared at the screen, my reflection flickering over the copied gowns. Once upon a time, I would have cried, ranted, begged for fairness, but not anymore. Now, I understood the game. "We're going to outdo them," I said calmly. Quietly, Beautifully, publicly. Elise blinked. How? I smiled. We're going to give them a story they can't steal. The next 3 months were war. Every day, I woke before dawn and sketched until my fingers cramped. Every night, I stayed up late with my team, crafting something that felt alive. A collection that wasn't just fashion, but defiance incarnate. I called it Inheritance, because that's what this was about. Taking back what was mine. The campaign centered on the idea that art, like strength, can't be manufactured. Every piece carried a handwritten tag that read, "You can copy a dress, but you can't copy a story." We launched quietly, without fanfare. No ads, no interviews, just truth, posted online with behind-the-scenes footage of our team sewing, laughing, creating with real hands. Within a week, the videos went viral. People were tired of perfection. They wanted authenticity. One morning, as I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed with a new message. From Vivian Harper. Well played. Let's talk. I smirked and set the phone down. I wasn't interested in her validation. Not anymore. Because I'd built something she couldn't buy. Something my mother could never destroy. Something that belonged entirely to me. But as my empire began to grow, I started to sense the next storm approaching, because power doesn't go unnoticed. And both Vivian and my mother had begun circling back into my orbit, drawn by the very success they once dismissed. And this time, I wasn't the girl they could underestimate. This time, I was the woman who had learned how to fight in silence and win in style. I used to think revenge was about fire, that it burned fast and loud and left everything in ashes. But the truth? Real revenge is slow, its patience in high heels, its elegance sharpened to a blade. By the time the storm came, I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I was the storm. Inheritance had blown up in ways I couldn't have imagined. My name wasn't just whispered in creative circles anymore. It was printed, broadcast, reposted, dissected. Willow Ray had become a symbol. Authenticity in an industry obsessed with imitation. But with recognition came attention. And attention attracts the wrong kind of eyes. Vivian Harper didn't take kindly to being outplayed. A few weeks after my collection launched, I got an invitation to a high-profile fashion gala in New York. The theme? Women of Influence. It felt suspiciously poetic. When I arrived, the room sparkled with everything expensive. Diamonds, champagne, egos. Vivian was hosting, of course. Tall, poised, perfectly painted in red. As I approached her, she smiled like a cat who'd already eaten the canary. "Willow," she purred. "You look radiant." Inheritance was impressive. "Thank you," I said evenly. I hear imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Her eyes flickered. "Careful, darling. You're still new here. You wouldn't want to make powerful enemies." "I don't make enemies," I replied. "I expose them." Her smile faltered just slightly, and that was enough for me. The night continued in slow motion. Glasses clinked, cameras flashed, and conversations buzzed like static. But then I heard a familiar voice, one that froze my blood. "Excuse me." "Yes, that's my daughter." My stomach dropped. I turned toward the source of the voice, and there she was. My mother, dressed in a sequined gown that screamed for attention, waving proudly at a group of reporters. "Oh, you don't know? Willow Grant, she's my daughter?" I always said she was destined for greatness. Every muscle in my body tensed. Reporters turned. Cameras pointed. Vivian raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Oh," she murmured. "So the prodigal mother returns." I clenched my jaw. "Excuse me." I found my mother near the bar, glowing with self-importance. She was holding a glass of champagne she clearly couldn't afford, and talking to a journalist who looked like he was regretting his life choices. "Mom," I hissed under my breath. She turned, her face lighting up with fake surprise. "Willow, darling, I was just telling everyone how proud I am of you." "Why are you here?" I asked, keeping my voice low. She smiled sweetly. "Vivian invited me. She said it would be good PR, mother-daughter reconciliation." "Isn't that wonderful?" My chest tightened. Vivian had done this on purpose. Of course she had. I took a deep breath. You shouldn't be here. Oh, don't be dramatic, she said, rolling her eyes. You're famous now. It's time to let bygones be bygones. Bygones? My voice cracked slightly. You told me I'd never make it. She laughed, leaning closer. And yet here you are. Doesn't that mean I was right to push you? I felt the blood rush to my face. You didn't push me. You broke me. Her smile faded. Oh, come on, Willow. Don't ruin this night with your martyr act. I wanted to walk away, to leave her standing there with her cheap perfume and polished lies. But something inside me, that quiet, steady part that had learned how to fight, told me no. It was time. The world saw me as a success story. But they didn't know the price of it. And tonight, I was going to tell them. When the host announced a brief interlude, Vivian took the stage to thank her guests. Cameras swarmed her. I could feel my pulse thudding in my throat. Then she said it. Before we continue, I'd like to celebrate one of our rising icons, Willow Ray. Her latest collection, Inheritance, has touched hearts around the world. Applause filled the room. And what makes her story even more inspiring, she added, smiling that devil's smile, is her loving mother, who supported her every step of the way. I snapped. I stepped forward before I could think. Actually, I said loudly, my voice cutting through the applause. That's not true. The room fell silent. Heads turned. Cameras swung toward me. Vivian's smile froze mid-frame. My mother didn't support me, I continued, walking to the stage. My heels clicked against the marble floor like gunfire. She mocked me, laughed at me, told me to give up. She called my passion a waste of time. I turned to face the crowd, a sea of stunned faces and whispering mouths. And now she's here. Not because she believed in me, but because she wants to share the spotlight she once refused to give. Gasps rippled through the room. My mother stood frozen, her face pale, her smile trembling. Vivian tried to interject. Willow, perhaps this isn't— No, it is, I said sharply. You wanted authenticity, Vivian. Well, here it is. I looked straight at my mother. You once told me I wasn't special. But tonight, every single person here knows that I am. Because I made myself that way. Silence. Heavy. Electric. Then someone started clapping. One person, then two. Then the entire room erupted in applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was thunderous. Raw. Real. Vivian's face tightened. My mother's tears spilled, mascara running down her cheeks. But I didn't look away. Not this time. After the gala, I stepped out into the cold night air. My heart was still pounding, adrenaline coursing through me. Elise met me outside, her eyes wide. Holy hell, she said. That was necessary, I finished. She grinned. You think you just made enemies? Probably, I said, exhaling a laugh. But I also made sure everyone knows exactly who I am. She smiled softly. And who's that? I looked up at the glittering skyline. A woman who stopped apologizing. The next morning, headlines exploded. Designer confronts mother in viral speech. Willow Ray calls out industry hypocrisy. Clips from the gala circulated online. My voice clear, my words unapologetic. Public reaction was overwhelming. Not judgment, but admiration. Messages poured in from women everywhere saying, "Thank you for saying what we couldn't." Vivian tried to spin it, of course, claiming it was a moment of female empowerment. But everyone saw through her. And my mother? She disappeared from social media entirely. I didn't block her. I didn't call. I didn't need to. Because for the first time, she couldn't twist the narrative. The truth was out there, and it didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to me. Fame doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums quietly, relentlessly, beneath every phone notification, every whisper on the street, every glance that lingers a little too long. After the gala, my world tilted. My words, that moment of raw defiance, had exploded across every platform imaginable. Within 24 hours, my name was trending in more countries than I could count. Willow Ray Truth. Inheritance speech. The designer who spoke. Some called me brave. Others said I was ungrateful. But I didn't care. For the first time in my life, the narrative was mine. I remember waking up the morning after, my phone vibrating nonstop. Elise burst into my apartment, clutching 2 cups of coffee and her laptop. "You've got to see this," she said breathlessly. She turned the screen toward me. Article after article, interview requests, commentaries dissecting every word I said. I didn't expect this, I whispered. Elise grinned. "Willow, you didn't just make a statement. You started a movement." I scrolled through messages. Hundreds from young designers, artists and dreamers who'd been dismissed, belittled, and silenced. One message stood out. "My mom told me art was a waste of time, too. Thank you for showing me it isn't." My throat tightened. That one line made every sleepless night worth it. But the higher you climb, the stronger the wind gets. By the end of the week, critics started circling. Talk shows debated whether I'd disrespected family values. Industry insiders questioned my professionalism. One journalist wrote that I weaponized trauma for sympathy. I'd expected backlash, but not the kind that dug so personally. One evening, while scrolling through yet another article twisting my words, Elise sighed. "They're just threatened," she said. "You embarrassed Vivian on her own stage. Of course they're lashing out." I leaned back, rubbing my temples. "It's not just them. It's the weight of it all. I wanted truth, not spectacle." "Truth is spectacle now," she said softly, "but you're handling it better than most." I smiled faintly. Handling is a generous word. A week later, I received an invitation to appear on a live interview show, one of the biggest in the country. The host, Dana Mills, was known for cutting straight to the bone. I hesitated. "Do it," Elise said. "Tell your story on your terms." So I agreed. The studio lights were blinding that day. My palms were damp. Cameras pointed in every direction. Dana greeted me with that practiced warmth that hides sharp edges. "Willow Grant, or should I say Willow Ray, welcome." "Thank you," I said, forcing a smile. "You've become the voice of authenticity in fashion," she began. "But some people think you went too far calling out your mother publicly. What do you say to them?" The question hit like a slap, but I'd prepared for it. "I didn't call out my mother," I said evenly. "I called out the version of her that couldn't see me. And I spoke for every child who's ever been told their dreams are foolish. If that's too far, then maybe silence has gone too far for too long." The audience erupted in applause. Dana looked momentarily thrown, then nodded. "Powerful words," I smiled slightly. Truth usually is. When the episode aired, viewership shattered records. And just like that, the tide shifted again. Suddenly, brands wanted collaborations. Magazines called me the future of ethical fashion. A few even compared me to legends, but I didn't bask in it. I'd learned that fame is a mirror. It shows you what people want to see, not who you really are. So while the world celebrated, I went back to work. In the studio, surrounded by fabric and humming machines, I felt grounded. The noise outside faded. Elise noticed it one night as we stitched late. "You're quiet lately," she said. "I'm just thinking," I murmured. "About?" "Everything I lost, and everything I gained." She gave me a knowing smile. "Balance never comes free," I nodded. "Neither does peace." Then came the message I didn't expect. It was from my mother. A short email. Subject line, "I'm sorry." I hesitated before opening it. "Willow, I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know I watched your interview. You were right. About everything. I was cruel because I was scared. Of you failing, of you proving me wrong, maybe both. I'm proud of you now, truly. Mom." I stared at the screen, tears burning behind my eyes. For a long time I didn't move. Didn't breathe, Elise noticed. "What's wrong?" I turned the laptop toward her. She read the message quietly, then asked, "Are you going to reply?" "I don't know," I whispered. "Do you want to?" I thought about that for a long time. About all the years I'd begged for those words and how now. "They didn't land the same, I think," I said softly. "I already have everything I needed." The next morning, I deleted the email. Not out of anger, but out of peace. Because closure doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from acceptance. And in that moment, I realized I'd outgrown the version of myself that needed her to say sorry. Weeks passed. Inheritance became more than a collection. It became a brand philosophy. We started workshops for young designers from struggling backgrounds, giving them materials, mentorship, and space to create. At our first workshop, I stood before a group of nervous 20-somethings holding sketchbooks and said, "Every masterpiece starts with doubt. But what makes it art is that you keep going anyway." They applauded, not because I was famous, but because they felt it, and that meant more to me than any runway show ever could. Then, one afternoon as I walked through my office, Elise approached with a hesitant look. "There's someone here to see you," she said. I frowned. "Who?" Before she could answer, a familiar voice came from behind. "Willow." I turned, and there she was, my mother, standing in the lobby of my studio, holding a small wrapped box. She looked older, softer. "I didn't know where else to go," she said quietly. "I wanted to see your world, the one I couldn't imagine." I didn't speak for a moment. Then I said, "You can look, but that's all." She nodded, tears forming. "That's more than I deserve." I led her through the workspace, past the sewing tables, the mannequins, the sketches pinned to walls. When we reached the main display room, she stopped, gazing at a gown shimmering under soft light. A dress made of layered white silk, with words embroidered faintly along the hem. "What does it say?" She whispered. I answered quietly. "Forgiven, but not forgotten." She covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. "It's beautiful," I met her eyes. "It's the only way I know how to say goodbye." When she left, I stood alone in that room for a long time. The city hummed outside, alive and endless, and in that silence I felt lighter, not because I'd won, but because I'd let go. The world had witnessed my reckoning. Now, I was ready to write the next chapter, one not built on pain, but purpose. The funny thing about winning is how quiet it can be. There are no fireworks, no applause that lasts forever, just silence. Heavy, stretching, asking you, "Now what?" That's how it felt after my mother's visit. For weeks, people still talked about me. Interviews, headlines, awards, all of it blurred together like noise from another room. But I wasn't chasing it anymore. The victory felt hollow if I couldn't feel myself in it. So I started waking up earlier, before the city roared to life, just to sit by the window with my coffee and breathe. It sounds small, but it was the first peace I'd earned in years. The studio kept growing. Inheritance became a movement, not just a brand. We were working with local artisans, sponsoring young designers, and redefining what creativity could look like outside of the system. It was everything I'd dreamed of, yet something still tugged at me. That quiet ache that comes when you realize revenge doesn't erase scars. It just rearranges them. Elise noticed it one afternoon. "You've been distant lately," she said gently as she organized fabric samples. I smiled faintly. "Just thinking. About your mom?" I nodded. "And about everything that came with her." Elise sighed. "You did the impossible, Willow. You built something out of nothing. Maybe now it's time to live, not just survive." Her words stuck with me. Time to live. The concept felt almost foreign. For so long, every heartbeat had been powered by defiance. Who was I without the fight? I tried to answer that question slowly. I began painting again, something I hadn't done since college. It started as a whim, a weekend distraction. But once I picked up a brush, something inside me loosened. The first piece I painted was a faceless woman standing in front of a storm, her hair tangled with wind but her stance unshaken. When I finished, I realized that woman was me. I hung it in my office. Clients often asked what it meant. I just smiled and said, "Resilience doesn't always look graceful." Around that time, Vivian Harper's empire started to crumble. It began with quiet whispers, internal leaks, staff departures, lawsuits over stolen designs. Soon, major outlets were reporting her company's ethical failures and toxic management. I didn't celebrate. Once I would have popped champagne at the thought of her downfall. But now all I felt was pity. Vivian had spent her life chasing control, the same way my mother had chased Image, and both had ended up alone, clutching their empires while everything else slipped away. That realization hit me hard, because it mirrored who I could have become if I hadn't stopped. Revenge might have freed me, but forgiveness saved me. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership conference in Los Angeles. The topic? Rising above the people who tried to hold you down. I nearly declined. Public speaking wasn't my comfort zone. But Elise convinced me. "You don't realize how many people need your voice," she said. So I went. Standing on that stage, I looked out at hundreds of faces, young, old, hopeful, broken, and I told them everything. I told them about the years I spent begging for validation, about the night my mother tore up my sketches, about crying over rejection letters and unpaid bills. But I also told them about the quiet power of persistence, how the world can doubt you endlessly, but it only takes one unwavering belief in yourself to change everything. And when I said, "Sometimes the people who hurt you are the reason you rise higher," the room went still. Then the applause began, not polite, but heartfelt. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about meaning. After that, things began to feel different. Slower, softer. I started visiting schools and mentoring students. Not about fashion, but about courage. One day, a young girl named Sophia handed me a sketch. It was a rough design, uneven lines, shy handwriting at the bottom, inspired by Willow Grant. I smiled so wide it hurt. She looked up at me with wide eyes. "Do you think I can really make it?" I knelt to meet her gaze. "You already are. The moment you dared to draw, you started." Her face lit up. And in that moment I saw my younger self, full of hope and fear and too much heart for a world that didn't understand her. Maybe that was the real victory. Not proving my mother wrong, but helping others believe they never needed permission to be right. That night, after the event, I found myself driving to the edge of the city. The skyline shimmered like 1,000 stories waiting to be told. I parked near the harbor and sat there, watching the reflection of lights ripple across the water. And for the first time, I let myself feel it all. The pain, the triumph, the loneliness, the love. Every thread that had woven me into who I was. I whispered to the wind, "I forgive you, Mom, for what you couldn't see. And for what you made me see. It wasn't for her. It was for me." A few months later, a gallery approached me to feature my art, the paintings I'd been quietly creating at night. The exhibition's title came to me instantly, "The Threads Between Us." On opening night, I stood before a crowd of people admiring my work, the same people who once defined me as just a designer. One of the paintings showed a mother and daughter standing apart, but connected by a single golden thread. A journalist asked, "Is it autobiographical?" I smiled softly. "Aren't all creations in some way?" After the event, Elise found me on the balcony overlooking the city. "You've changed," she said, smiling. "I had to," I replied. If I stayed angry, I'd still be living in her story. "Now I'm writing mine." She raised her glass. "To rewriting." "To peace," I said, clinking it gently. Later that night, as I walked home under the glow of streetlights, I realized something. Revenge had started this story. But redemption was going to end it. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was chasing anything. I was exactly where I needed to be. Some people think closure comes when the pain stops. But I've learned that real closure comes when you stop needing the pain to define you. It's been almost 2 years since that night at the gala, the night my truth found a microphone. 2 years since I stood before the world and said, "Enough," and sometimes when I think back, it still feels unreal. I walk into my studio each morning, sunlight spilling through wide windows, fabric rolls stacked like rainbow towers. There's laughter now, interns chatting, designers sketching, music floating through the air. It feels alive, human, safe. Once, this place was only a dream I whispered to myself in the dark. Now it's proof that survival can bloom into something beautiful. Last week, I did something small but symbolic. I framed one of my very first sketches. the same one my mother once tore to pieces. When I found the torn version years ago, I had taped it back together just enough to redraw it. It wasn't perfect, but that was the point. Now, it hangs near the front of my studio, under a small plaque that reads, "Rebuilt by hand." Every time I pass it, I smile, not with bitterness, but with gratitude, because without that moment of destruction, I might never have learned what I was capable of building. A few weeks ago, I got an invitation to an international fashion summit in Paris. They wanted me to deliver the keynote speech. Creativity through resilience. Standing on that stage, looking out at faces from all over the world, I realized something profound. I wasn't nervous. For the first time, I felt completely at home. I spoke not about revenge or fame, but about truth. About how art is born from the spaces between heartbreak and hope. And near the end, I told them this: success isn't the applause. It's the moment you realize you'd still do it, even if no one was watching. The room went silent. Some people cried. I think they understood. That night, as I walked along the Seine, the city lights reflected like fireflies on the water. I thought about my mother. I hadn't seen her since the day she came to my studio. But a few months ago, she sent me a photo. My gown, the one from my first big collection, hanging in her living room. Below it, she'd written a single line: "Now I see what you saw all along." It didn't reopen old wounds. It closed them gently. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to stop reopening the door to the hurt. Elise and I sometimes talk about those early days, the nights spent stitching by lamplight, crying over rent, dreaming about making it big. Now she runs operations for the brand. I still design, but more slowly, more intentionally. One afternoon, as we reviewed sketches for a new line, she looked at me and said, "You're different, you know." I laughed. "Older, maybe." "No," she said. "You're calmer. Like you stopped fighting ghosts," I smiled. "That's because I realized something. I was never fighting them. I was fighting the version of myself who believed I needed their approval." She grinned. "Well, that version doesn't stand a chance anymore." We laughed, and for the first time, the sound didn't echo off walls of exhaustion. It felt free. The new collection is called Reverie. Every piece tells a story, of growth, of silence, of voices reclaimed. During the show's final rehearsal, I stood backstage, watching the models glide down the runway. The lights shimmered off their dresses, fabrics layered in soft golds, muted blues, and silvers that caught the light like morning frost. And I realized this was the art I'd always wanted to create. Not fashion that screamed, but fashion that spoke. One of the final gowns bore faint embroidery along its hemline, a single quote stitched in white thread. "Peace looks good on me." When the lights dimmed and the crowd rose in applause, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt complete. After the show, I stepped outside into the cool night. Paris smelled like rain and roses. A reporter caught up to me, microphone in hand. "Willow," she asked, "if you could go back and speak to the younger version of yourself, the one who felt invisible, the one who almost gave up, what would you tell her?" I thought for a long moment. Then I said quietly, "I'd tell her that silence isn't humility, it's surrender. And you never owed anyone your silence." The reporter smiled softly. "That's beautiful." I looked up at the sky, stars faint between city lights. "No," I said. "It's true." When I returned to my hotel that night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in years. The final page read, "I used to think my story was about proving them wrong, but now I see it was about proving myself right." A few weeks later, I visited a small art academy back in Virginia, the same town I grew up in. They had asked me to give a guest lecture. I almost said no. Too many ghosts still lingered there, but something inside me said it was time. When I arrived, I walked the familiar halls, chipped paint, buzzing fluorescent lights, the faint smell of glue and chalk. In one of the classrooms, a young girl raised her hand. "Ms. Grant, is it true your mother didn't believe in you?" The room went quiet. I smiled gently. "It's true, but that doesn't make her the villain of my story." It makes her the reason I learned to believe in myself sooner." The students clapped softly, not because it was rehearsed, but because they felt it. After class, I stayed behind, sketching quietly while the janitor swept the floor. The hum of the broom, the scratching of my pencil, it all felt like closure. I don't chase revenge anymore. I don't crave apologies, because life has already apologized. Through every sunrise, every success, every heartbeat that says, "You made it." The fire that once consumed me now keeps me warm. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you can build peace out of ashes, if you're brave enough to stop feeding the flames. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Because sometimes, it's not about proving the world wrong. It's about proving that you were always enough, even when they couldn't see it. Tell me, what part of your story are you still afraid to tell?